Now, I want to get into the issue of lunar eclipses because when I first started looking into this whole flat Earth thing, that was one of the big ones that I couldn't figure out. How in the world does a lunar eclipse work on the flat Earth model? Now, many people out there think the phases of the moon are caused by the curvature of the Earth. Those people clearly haven't thought their argument through, especially if you go outside and see a waxing or waning a gibbous or crescent moon up in the sky at the same time the sun's out. If you think the Earth is casting the circular phase shadows on the moon, you've got a really big problem with angles because the sun's up at the same time as the moon's up when it's a crescent moon. Clearly, that is not the shadow curvature of the Earth being depicted on the moon for the phases. The Earth is not responsible for the phases of the moon, even in the spinning heliocentric NASA, based model. It's not. They say that the phases of the moon are caused by the angles of the sun's light hitting the moon. They maintain that the moon is a reflector of the sun's light. But as we're going to see in this episode, as I go through the book by Dr. Samuel Rowbotham, Zetetic Astronomy, that's not the case. Biblically speaking, the Book of Enoch would lead you to believe that the moon is self-illuminating. It is not reflecting light. So if the phases of the moon are not caused by the shadow of the Earth, what about the lunar eclipse? Now, that one, everybody seems to understand to be the result of the moon going into the Earth's shadow, as depicted here. You have the Earth's penumbra and the Earth's umbra. And as the moon starts to go into the umbra side of it, that's where somehow the dark shadow of the Earth makes the moon turn red. Like, that even makes sense. But that's what we're taught. That's what all the charts and everything show. But is that really the case? Well, let's see. This author points out some really interesting things regarding lunar eclipses and solar eclipses as well. It says, beginning on page 101, causes of solar and lunar eclipses. A solar eclipse is a result simply of the moon passing between the sun and the observer on Earth. But that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the Earth is a statement in every respect, because unproved, unsatisfactory. The Earth has been proved to be without orbital or axial motion, and therefore it could never come between the sun and the moon. The Earth is also proved to be a plane, always underneath the sun and moon, and therefore to speak of its intercepting the light of the sun and thus casting its own shadow on the moon is to say that which is physically impossible. And this also gets into the whole issue of self-illumination. And we've talked about that in previous shows, but the ancient texts do not in any way support the idea that the moon is receiving her light from the sun. It says that she's giving or causing her own light. So the phases are internal, not external. Dr. Rowbotham goes on to say, besides the above difficulties or incompatibilities, many cases are on record of the sun and moon being eclipsed when both were above the horizon. That's a big problem. The sun, the earth, and the moon not in a straight line, but the earth below the sun and moon, out of the reach or direction of both, and yet a lunar eclipse has occurred. Is it possible that a shadow of the earth could be thrown upon the moon when sun, earth, and moon were not in the same line? The difficulty has been met by assuming the influence of refraction, as in the following quotations. And he's citing somebody here. It says, on some occasions, the horizontal refraction amounts to 36 or 37 minutes, and generally to about 33 minutes, which is equal to the diameter of the sun or moon, and therefore the whole disk of the sun or moon will appear above the horizon, both at rising and setting, although actually below. This is the reason that the full moon has sometimes been seen above the horizon before the sun was set. A remarkable instance of this kind was observed at Paris on the 19th of July, 1750, when the moon appeared visibly eclipsed, while the sun was distinctly to be seen above the horizon. That's a quote from Astronomy and Astronomical Instruments by George G. Gary. Another quote here. On the 20th of July, 1837, the moon appeared to rise eclipsed before the sun had set. The same phenomenon was observed on the 20th of September, 1717. That's from McCulloch's Geography, page 85. Let's see, he's got another one here. In the lunar eclipses of July 17th, 1590, November 3rd, 1648, June 16th, 1666, and May 26, 1668, the moon rose eclipsed, whilst the sun was still apparently above the horizon. Those horizontal eclipses were noticed as early as the time of Pliny. That's according to the Illustrated London Almanac for 1864, the astronomical articles in which are by James Glaisher, ESQ of the Greenwich Royal Observatory, page 99. Another citation. On the 17th of January, 1870, a similar phenomenon occurred, and again in July of the same year. That's the reference there is the Daily Telegraph, July 16th, 1870. The only explanation which has been given of this phenomenon is the refraction caused by the Earth's atmosphere. This at first sight is a plausible and fairly satisfactory solution, but on carefully examining the subject, it is found to be utterly inadequate. And those who have recourse to it cannot be aware that the refraction of an object and that of a shadow are in opposite directions. An object by refraction is bent upwards, but the shadow of any object is bent downwards, as will be seen by the following very simple experiment. Take a plain white shallow basin and place it 10 or 12 inches from a light in such a position that the shadow of the edge of the basin touches the center of the bottom. Hold a rod vertically over and on the edge of the shadow to denote its true position. Now let water be gradually poured into the basin, and the shadow will be seen to recede or shorten inwards and downwards. But if a rod or a spoon is allowed to rest, with its upper end towards the light and the lower end in the bottom of the vessel, it will be seen as the water is poured in to bend upwards, thus proving that if refraction operated at all, it would do so by elevating the moon above its true position and throwing the Earth's shadow downwards or directly away from the moon's surface. Hence it is clear that a lunar eclipse by a shadow of the Earth is an utter impossibility. The moon's entire surface, or that portion of it which is presented to the Earth, has also been distinctly seen during the whole time of a total lunar eclipse. This is entirely incompatible with the doctrine that an eclipse of the moon is the result of a shadow of the Earth passing over its surface. Mr. Walker, who observed the lunar eclipse on March 19, 1848, near Collumpton, says, the appearances were as usual till 20 minutes past 9. At that period, and for the space of the next hour, instead of an eclipse, or the shadow umbra of the Earth being the cause of the total obscurity of the moon, the whole face of that body became very quickly and most beautifully illuminated, and assumed the appearance of the glowing heat of fire from the furnace, rather tinged with a deep red, the whole disk of the moon being as perfect with light as if there had been no eclipse whatever. The moon positively gave good light from its disk during the total eclipse. That's from Philosophical Magazine number 220 from August 1848. The following case, although not exactly similar to the last, is worth recording here as showing that some other cause existed than the Earth's shadow to produce a lunar eclipse. He cites somebody here saying, extraordinary phenomena attending the eclipse. On Saturday evening, February 27th, 1858, at Brussels, the eclipse was seen by several English philosophers who happened to be present. It was attended by a very remarkable appearance, which Dr. Foster said was wholly inexplicable on any laws of natural philosophy with which he was acquainted. The moment before contact, a small dusky spot appeared on the moon's surface, and during the whole of the eclipse, a reddish-brown fringe, or penumbra, projected above the shadow of the Earth. Another thing still more remarkable was the apparent irregularity of the edge of the shadow. 3 persons, one of them an astronomer, were witnesses of these curious phenomena which no law of refraction can in any way explain. That's a quote from Morning Star of Wednesday, March 3rd, 1858. The author continues. The several cases above advanced are logically destructive of the notion that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the earth. As before stated, the earth is proved to be a plane without motion and always several hundred miles below the sun and moon and cannot, by any known possibility, come between them. It cannot therefore intercept the light of the sun and throw its own shadow upon the moon. If such a thing were a natural possibility, how could the moon continue to shine during the whole or any considerable part of the period of its passage through the dark shadow of the earth? Refraction, or what has been called earth light, will not aid in the explanation, because the light of the moon is at such times like the glowing heat of fire tinged with deep red. Reddish is not the word to express it. It was red hot. The reddish light made it seem to be on fire. It looked like a fire smoldering in its ashes. Its tint was that of red-hot copper. Those were all quotes. The sunlight is of an entirely different color to that of the eclipsed moon, and it is contrary to known optical principles to say that light, when refracted or reflected, or both simultaneously, is thereby changed in color. If a light of a given color is seen through a great depth of comparatively dense medium, as the sun is often seen in winter through the fog or vapor of the atmosphere, it appears of a different color, and generally of such as that which the moon so often gives during a total eclipse. But a shadow cannot produce any such effect, as it is in fact not an entity at all, but simply the absence of light. From the facts and phenomena already advanced, we cannot draw any other conclusion than that the moon is obscured by some kind of semi-transparent body passing before it, and through which the luminous surface is visible. The luminosity changed in color by the density of the intervening object. This conclusion is forced upon us by the evidence, but it involves the admission that the moon shines with light of its own, that it is not a reflector of the sun's light, but absolutely self-luminous. Although this admission is logically compulsory, it will be useful and strictly zetetic to collect all the evidence possible which bears upon it. First, a reflector is a plane or concave surface which gives off or returns what it receives. If a piece of red-hot metal or any other heated object is placed before a plane or concave surface, heat is reflected. If snow or ice or any artificial freezing mixture is similarly placed, cold will be reflected. If light of any given color is placed in the same way, the same color of light will be reflected. If a given sound is produced, the same tone or pitch will be reflected. A reflector will not throw off cold when heat is placed before it, nor heat when cold is presented. If a red light is received, red light will be returned, not blue or yellow. If the note C is sounded upon any musical instrument, a reflector will not return the note D or G, but precisely the same note when altered only in degree and intensity. If the moon is a reflector of the sun's light, she could not radiate or throw down upon the earth any other light than such as she first receives from the sun. No difference could exist in the quality of character of the light, and it could not possibly differ in any other respect than that of intensity or quantity. It has been asserted in opposition to the above that the moon might absorb some of the rays of light from the sun and reflect only the remaining rays. To this, it is replied that absorption means speedy saturation. A piece of blotted paper, or a lump of hard sugar, or a sponge, when brought into contact with any fluid or gaseous substance, would only absorb for a short time. It would quickly become saturated, filled to repletion, and from that moment would cease to absorb, and ever afterwards could only reflect or throw back whatever was projected upon it. So the moon, if an object without light of her own, might at the beginning of her existence absorb the sun's rays, and fixing some might return the others, but as already shown, she could only absorb to saturation, which would occur in a very short time, and from this point of saturation to the present moment, she could only have been other than a reflector too, of all which she receives. We have then, in order to know whether the moon is a reflector, merely to ascertain whether the light which we receive from her is or is not the same in character as that received from the sun. And due to the lack of time we have left in this broadcast, I'm not going to continue, probably to your great joy and my terrible reading of this. But this author goes on to describe the many differences in the type of light that comes from the sun and the type of light that comes from the moon. And as I said earlier, this author is quite thorough in his explanations and experiments. And he goes on to describe various ancient cultures that talk about a dark object that is also part of our solar system. Skipping ahead here, page 114, talking about the moon being self-illuminating. We have seen that during a lunar eclipse, the moon's self-luminous surface is covered by a semi-transparent something, that this something is a definite mass because it has a distinct and circular outline, is seen during its first and last contact with the moon. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing before the sun, so from the evidence above collected, it is evident that a lunar eclipse arises from a similar cause. A body, semi-transparent and well-defined, passes before the moon, or between the moon's surface and the observer on the surface of the earth. That many such bodies exist in the firmament is almost a matter of certainty, and that one such as that which eclipses the moon exists at no great distance above the surface is a matter admitted by many of the leading astronomers of the day, that being the late 1800s. In the report of the Council of the Royal Astronomical Society for June 1850, it is said, quote, "We may well doubt whether that body which we call the moon is the only satellite of the earth," end quote. In the report of the Academy of Sciences of October 12, 1846, and again for August 1847, the director of one of the French observatories gives a number of observations and calculations which have led him to conclude that, quote, "There is at least one non-luminous body of considerable magnitude which is attached as a satellite to this earth," end quote. Sir John Herschel admits that, quote, "invisible moons exist in the firmament," end quote. That's from Herschel's Astronomy, page 521 and 616. Sir John Lubbock is of the same opinion and gives rules and formula for calculating their distances, periods, etc. At the meeting of the British Association of the Advancement of Science in 1850, the president stated that, quote, "The opinion was gaining ground that many of the fixed stars were accompanied by companions emitting no light," end quote. Quote, "The changeable stars which disappear for a time or are eclipsed have been supposed to have very large opaque bodies revolving about or near to them so as to obscure them when they come in conjunction with us," end quote. That's from the Encyclopedia Londinensis. Fixed stars is the category. Another quote here. Bessel, the greatest astronomer of our time, in a letter to myself in July 1844, said, "I do indeed continue in the belief that Procyon and Sirius are both true double stars, each consisting of one visible and one invisible star. A laborious inquiry just completed by Peters at Königsberg and a similar one by Schubert, the calculator employed on the North American Nautical Almanac, support Bessel." That's from a work called Physical Description of the Heavens by Humboldt, page 183, copyright 1867. Another quote. "The belief in the existence of non-luminous stars was prevalent in Grecian antiquity and especially in the early times of Christianity. It was assumed that among the fiery stars which are nourished by vapors, there move other earthly bodies which remain invisible to us." That's from Origin. Another one by Diogenes of Apollonica, Stars that are invisible and consequently have no name move in space together with those that are visible. Lambert, in his cosmological letters, admits the existence of, quote, dark cosmological bodies of great size. Now, if all this is true, this may solve the problem of what do we do with things like this Planet X Nibiru thing, which even in the spinning heliocentric globe model is reckoned to be a dark planetary body. So, and of course, scientists are all talking about dark matter and everything today, even in that standard model. So if people can talk about dark bodies in the spinning heliocentric globe expanding universe model, then why couldn't we apply the same thing to the flat Earth enclosed model? What if there are dark bodies within the dome? Rowbotham continues. We have now seen that the existence of dark bodies revolving about the luminous objects in the firmament has been admitted by practical observers from the earliest ages, and that in our own day, such a mass of evidence has accumulated on the subject that astronomers are compelled to admit that not only dark bodies, which occasionally obscure the luminous stars when in conjunction, but that cosmological bodies of large size exist, and that, quote, one at least is attached as a satellite to this Earth, end quote. It is this dark or, quote, non-luminous satellite, end quote, which when in conjunction or in line with the moon and an observer on Earth is the immediate cause of a lunar eclipse. That's page 116 of Zetetic Astronomy by Dr. Samuel Rowbotham. And actually, as I continued to search this out, I found some interesting things within the Hindu religion. Now, look, I'm not going to say I'm going to put any authority on Hindu scriptures over biblical scriptures. I'm not taking my doctrine from the Hindus. But, you know, I think if we're going to be true Zetetic explorers or people who are on a genuine quest for truth, doing investigation by observation and inquiry, then we have to look at the available evidence. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us how eclipses are caused, so we don't get any information, you know, at least not that I'm aware of. Somebody's free to message me and tell me otherwise, but as far as I know, the Bible doesn't tell you how a solar or lunar eclipse takes place, like the mechanics of it, how it happens. So, and if these astronomers, at least from the 1800s and from antiquity, are admitting that there are dark objects in the sky, then, you know, we would expect it to show up in the literature of other people around the world. And indeed we do. The Hindus have these interesting characters called Rahu and Ketu in their mythology. And I got this website here when I looked it up. Let us now take a closer look at the mythical origin of the dark demon Rahu. In old Indian tales, Rahu storms across the heavens in a dark chariot drawn by 8 black horses as swift as thought itself. He pursues the orbs of sun and moon, snapping at their heels with his huge jaws. In another version of the myth, however, only Rahu's head still exists, floating above the firmament, having been severed by Indra, the sun god, as the dark demon tried to steal the vital drink of the gods. Nonetheless, this decapitation did not hinder him from continuing to fly through the heavens and swallowing the sun and moon. It is just that these now passed through him unharmed and soon reappeared, freed from the lower end of his throat. In astronomical terms, this process signifies the end of the solar or lunar eclipse, respectively. So basically, they have this idea of this floating head of a god out there that tries to swallow up the sun and moon, but obviously, because it's decapitated, the sun and moon just exit the other side. So that would give the illusion that we see in the sky from a mythological perspective of this rounded object coming up on the moon, and then the moon going through it and then coming out the other end. So you can kind of see where they get that idea from. And you can look them up on Wikipedia or elsewhere online. This is Rahu right here and Ketu right here. So if nothing else, you know, here's some things to think about, okay? Again, I'm just exploring this stuff. I'm trying to put pieces together, see what could be, what might be other ways to look at things that we've been taught our whole life. But I just want to say that the issue of the lunar eclipse is sort of falling apart as it pertains to being a solid argument that would keep me tied to the globe model. In other words, I'm finding evidence both scientifically, at least from the 1800s, people writing in various scientific journals, as well as historical accounts of the ancients talking about a dark body that could be responsible for causing the moon to go into lunar eclipse. And frankly, the whole idea of the moon going into a blood red lunar eclipse while the sun is still up, in my mind, obliterates the whole idea that the lunar eclipse is due to the sun, earth, and moon being in a line and the moon in the shadow of the earth. It doesn't work.